Canada flight cancelled after child refuses to wear seatbelt, sparking debate over airline safety and parenting. A flight in Canada was cancelled after a young child repeatedly refused to wear a seatbelt, sparking a wider debate about airline safety, parenting responsibilities, and how airlines should handle difficult situations involving children. Now let's explore the complete story from every perspective on our AI
An
podcast.
Airbus A320 weighs roughly 170,000 pounds.
Right, it's just massive.
It really is. I mean, it has tens of thousands of pounds of thrust. It runs on millions of lines of intricate computer code, and it takes this huge, highly coordinated team of, engineers, pilots, air traffic controllers, just to push back from a gate.
Oh, absolutely. It's a marvel.
But on August 6th, this multi-million-dollar marvel of modern engineering was brought to its absolute knees, just completely grounded by a 30-pound human being who just wanted to hide underneath a chair.
Yeah, and it really is the ultimate collision of two completely incompatible worlds, I mean, when you think about it.
Right.
On one side, you have this uncompromising, incredibly rigid reality of international aviation safety protocols, and then on the other side, you have the completely unpredictable, highly emotional, and wonderfully messy reality of human biology and behavior.
Which is just a wild contrast.
It is. And this isn't just a story about a frustrating travel delay. It is a fascinating look at what happens when these inflexible systemic rules hit a literal wall of primal human panic.
And that collision is exactly what we are getting into on this deep dive. I mean, we have a really fascinating stack of sources to pull from today.
We really do.
We are looking at recent news reports, first-hand eyewitness passenger accounts from CBC News, highly technical aviation safety expert interviews provided to the BBC, and television commentary that spans the entire media spectrum, like from Fox News to NBC.
It covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, so our mission today is to explore this massive systemic clash. We're going to examine the inflexible laws of aviation safety, the agonizing reality of parenting a terrified child in a confined public space, and of course, the intense, fiery debate that ignites when those two forces collide.
Because when you really analyze it, this incident acts as a stress test for our modern infrastructure.
Oh, for sure.
It forces us to ask, how our systems are actually built, what kind of human being they assume we are, and what happens when someone, in this case, a very young child, just utterly fails to meet those rigid behavioral expectations.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to go back to the night of August 6th. The setting is a Porter Airlines flight scheduled to fly from Victoria to Toronto.
Right.
It's late at night. The plane is fully boarded. They're preparing for departure. Everyone is doing that usual pre-flight routine, stowing bags, putting phones on airplane mode.
Getting settled in.
Exactly. But there is a young child who refuses to wear a seatbelt. And they aren't just unbuckled. They're actively standing up in the seat. So the parent tries desperately to get them seated. The cabin crew steps in to offer help. But absolutely nothing works. The child simply will not remain secured.
And this is where the hidden interlocking gears of modern air travel logistics really begin to grind against each other. Because the flight crew is essentially trapped in a regulatory box. They cannot, under federal aviation regulations, legally or safely take off with an unsecured passenger.
Right, it's just illegal.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if that passenger is a CEO or a toddler. So after exhausting their immediate options at the gate, they're forced to make the incredibly frustrating call to return the aircraft to the terminal, just to have this child and the parent to plane.
Which, on the surface, sounds like a relatively straightforward, albeit unfortunate solution. You go back, you drop off the passengers who can't fly, and you take off 20 minutes later.
You would think so, right?
But that isn't what happened at all, because this was a late-night flight. The time spent returning to the gate, coordinating with ground crews, and just managing the whole deplaning process pushed them past a critical, hard-coded threshold in airport operations.
Right. Specifically, they collided with the midnight runway closure curfew.
Right, and I want to pause on this because it's a concept that people, they often misunderstand it.
They do.
A curfew isn't just a polite request from the control tower. When I was reading through the logistical breakdowns in these sources, it became really clear that this is less like missing a bus and much more like missing a space launch window.
That's a great analogy.
If you miss that exact 5-minute gap, the orbital mechanics of the entire network mean you are scrubbed until tomorrow. You have local municipal noise abatement laws that trigger massive fines. You have scheduled runway maintenance that requires heavy machinery to roll out onto the tarmac the absolute second the clock strikes 12.
Exactly. And you also have the compounding factor of crew duty hours.
Oh, right. The timeouts.
Yeah. Pilots and flight attendants are strictly regulated by federal laws regarding how many hours they can actually be on duty without rest. And it's to prevent catastrophic fatigue-related accidents.
Which makes sense.
Totally. But it means that a 20-minute delay to remove a passenger doesn't just mean you arrive 20 minutes late. It might mean the pilot legally times out while they're just sitting at the gate. And if that happens, the airline has to find a completely new crew at midnight, which is pretty much impossible.
It is a total cascade failure. And because they missed that curfew, the flight couldn't leave.
Yeah.
The airline had to cancel the entire leg. Every single passenger on that plane had to be offloaded, sent to hotels, and rebooked for the next day. I mean, a massive multi-million-dollar piece of equipment was knocked out of position for its morning routes out of Toronto, meaning this one unbuckled seatbelt probably caused a ripple effect of delays across the entire North American network the following morning.
Yeah, and just think about the collective tension of that environment. I mean, have you ever been on a plane sitting on the tarmac waiting for just one person to sit down or stow a bag so you can leave?
Oh, all the time.
You can practically feel the impatience vibrating through the cabin. Now imagine that agonizing wait ending not with the relief of takeoff, but with the captain coming over the intercom to announce a total cancellation.
It's brutal. So a missed launch window forces a total cancellation. But it begs the question, if they are 5 minutes from the curfew and the crew is watching the clock tick down and the only thing standing in the way is a toddler refusing a lap belt, why can't the pilot just make an executive decision to take off?
Right.
Like, why is an unbelted kid such an absolute immovable red line that you are willing to strand hundreds of people?
To truly understand that rigid boundary, we have to look really closely at the physics of aviation safety.
Okay.
Leah Tuso, who is an aviation safety expert focusing specifically on child passengers, she spoke to the BBC about this exact scenario, and she detailed the extreme physical mechanics of what an aircraft is actually doing during its most critical phases, which are takeoff and landing. When a commercial airliner rolls down a runway, it is accelerating to roughly 150 miles per hour in just a matter of seconds.
And it isn't just a smooth drive down a highway either. You're dealing with massive kinetic energy.
Precisely. And the core danger isn't just the forward momentum, it's the risk of what pilots call a rejected takeoff, or an RTO.
Right, an RTO.
Imagine the plane is accelerating, and right before it hits the speed of no return, an engine ingests a bird, or a warning light flashes. The pilot has to slam on the auto brakes and deploy the spoilers, taking this massive machine from 150 miles per hour to 0 in seconds. The G-forces involved in that deceleration are incredibly violent.
I was trying to visualize this when reading Tuso's breakdown. It really is like driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour with a 40-pound iron dumbbell just resting loose on your dashboard and then slamming on the brakes.
Exactly.
That dumbbell doesn't just fall on the floor. It becomes a lethal projectile.
And what's fascinating here is the stark, almost brutal comparison Tuso makes to illustrate this point.
Yeah.
From a purely mathematical physical standpoint, the laws of physics do not care that this object is a human child. An unrestrained child is treated by kinetic energy essentially as unsecured luggage.
Which is a deeply jarring phrase, unsecured luggage.
It is incredibly harsh to hear, but it represents the unforgiving reality the flight crew is legally obligated to operate within. If that plane experiences a rejected takeoff, or if it hits a severe unexpected air pocket shortly after liftoff, a 30-pound child who isn't buckled in will literally be thrown across the cabin.
Wow.
They could be catastrophically injured themselves, or their mass flying through the air could strike and seriously injure another passenger. So, from the crew's perspective, turning a blind eye and taking off wasn't just a minor bending of the rules, it was introducing a genuine physical threat to the survival of the people in that cabin.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it's easy to look at a regulatory rule book and say, well, unsecured luggage, tie it down.
Right.
The physics equation is cold, hard, and rational. Force equals mass times acceleration. But We aren't dealing with luggage here. We are dealing with a biological organism. The human element complicates those cold physics instantly.
It really does.
We have an eyewitness account from another passenger on that specific flight, Araya Kozuk, who gave an interview to CBC News. And his perspective completely shifted how I looked at the dynamic inside that cabin.
Because his account clarifies that this wasn't a simple case of a child throwing a bratty, defiant tantrum because they didn't get their way.
Far from it. Kozuk noted that the child didn't appear to be deliberately causing trouble or acting out of malice at all. The child was genuinely, profoundly terrified.
Yeah.
According to his first-hand account, the child was repeatedly hiding and sliding backwards underneath the seat. Every single time a parent or a flight attendant tried to gently place the child back into the seat and secure the belt, the child managed to slip away and retreat back under the chair.
Just trying to escape.
Exactly. So I have to push back a little on this strict safety logic. It is so easy to sit in a boardroom and write a rule for unsecured luggage. But how on earth is a flight crew or an exhausted parent supposed to apply that rigid physical rule to a panicked toddler who is actively fleeing for their life under a seat? You cannot just strap down liquid panic.
And you've hit on the exact impossible neurological stalemate they were trapped in. I mean, an aircraft cabin is a highly unnatural, incredibly overwhelming sensory environment.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it from a developmental standpoint. The engines emit a low-frequency roar. The air pressure suddenly changes, which can cause real physical pain in the inner ear. It is incredibly claustrophobic, and you are surrounded by hundreds of towering strangers.
It's a lot for anyone, let alone a kid.
Exactly. For a young child, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for logic, reasoning, and understanding, that's just a seatbelt. That part is entirely underdeveloped.
So when that sensory overload hits, logic doesn't even enter the equation.
Not at all. The brain is hijacked by the amygdala. It triggers an absolute instinctual fight-or-flight response. The child is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. In that moment of primal terror, the child's reality is that they are in mortal danger.
And in this case, the biological response was flight, literally retreating into the darkest, smallest space available, which was under the chair.
Right. And here is why this creates a systemic failure. Aviation rules demand absolute compliance for safety. They require order, rational behavior, and obedience to physics.
Yeah.
But a frightened toddler's brain is biologically incapable of rational obedience in a state of terror. So you have an unbreakable federal safety rule meeting an uncontrollable instinctual human panic response. The crew was entirely paralyzed, they couldn't bend the laws of physics, and they couldn't reason with an amygdala hijack.
Because the crew couldn't bend the laws of physics and the child couldn't override their own nervous system, the flight gets scrubbed. And the second those passengers are sent back to the terminal and pull out their phones, this incident stops being a localized logistics problem and instantly transforms into a full-blown cultural flashpoint.
It really acts as a perfect Rorschach test for how our society views discipline, parenting, and public spaces.
Completely. The online and media fallout from this was massive and immediate. You look at the media reaction, and it is fascinating because it highlights two completely incompatible moral frameworks colliding over one delayed flight.
Yeah.
And just to be clear to the listeners, we aren't endorsing either of these views. We're just laying out what was in the sources. But on one side of the spectrum, you have television commentary like Fox News' morning program, where co-host Charles Hurt weighed in on the incident. He argued that the situation had gone entirely too far and expressed support for physical discipline in this context. His argument was essentially that while parenting is undeniably difficult, this specific level of disruption, canceling a flight for hundreds of people, crossed a line where physical enforcement by the parent was justified.
And you can instantly see how that perspective forms. Right. Prioritizing the functioning of the system and the time of the collective group over the immediate comfort of the individual who was causing the breakdown. But on the exact opposite side of that spectrum, there was a fierce, immediate counterwave.
A massive pushback. You had commentators and thousands of people online vehemently arguing the exact opposite. They stated that using physical force or punishment to make a genuinely terrified child comply with a federal airline regulation is not just unacceptable, it's deeply cruel.
Yeah.
They argued that you cannot beat a panic attack out of a toddler just to satisfy an airport curfew schedule.
Which perfectly encapsulates the broader unresolvable debate. I mean, one side sees a catastrophic behavioral failure that ruins the plans of hundreds of innocent people demanding strict correction. The other side sees a distressed, vulnerable human being and a systemic failure of the airline to show basic human empathy.
So what does this all mean for the people actually running the plane? If the public is this deeply divided and the cabin crew is trapped in the middle of this Rorschach test, it seems like the simplest solution was staring them in the face much earlier.
What do you mean?
When the child first refused the seatbelt, before the midnight curfew became a ticking time bomb, why didn't the airline just forcefully march the single family off the plane immediately? Like, shut the door, save the flight for the other 100 people, and deal with the fight out later.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you realize that airlines have learned the hard way that rapid forced removals are a public relations landmine.
Oh,
The hesitation of the flight crew isn't just about trying to be nice. It is deeply rooted in historical precedent. There are specific incidents that have fundamentally changed how airlines operate in these exact moments.
let's dig into those precedents. What exactly happened that makes crews so hesitant to just clear the aisle?
Let's look closely at a highly publicized incident from 2018. It was a Southwest Airlines flight traveling from Chicago to Atlanta. A father and his very young daughter were removed from the plane due to the child's distress.
Okay.
But a fellow passenger filmed the aftermath and publicly pointed out a crucial detail, which was that the child had actually calmed down. The father had managed to soothe her. She had been sitting quietly for several minutes before the crew came over and informed the father that the protocol had already been triggered and they were being kicked off.
Oh, wow. So the human element of the situation had naturally resolved itself, but the inflexible corporate machine just kept marching forward to kick them off anyway?
According to the viral video and the passenger who filmed it, yes. Southwest later released a statement saying the initial conversation with the father had escalated prior to the recording, but in the era of smartphone cameras, the nuance is irrelevant.
Great, the damage is done.
The PR damage was immediate and devastating. The optic was a massive corporation bullying a father and a newly calm child. And this isn't an isolated vulnerability.
There are others.
Yeah, if you go back to 2012, there was a major incident on a JetBlue flight. A family was removed because the crew stated they failed to comply with safety instructions for an extended period regarding a distressed child. That family didn't just complain to customer service, they went on NBC's Today program.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, they broadcasted to millions of viewers across the country, accusing the airline of completely lacking compassion for a struggling parent. JetBlue had to mount an aggressive public defense of the captain's decision, heavily citing the safety and comfort of everyone else on board.
Which explains the hesitation perfectly. Airlines aren't just managing a delayed flight, they are managing the 50 smartphone lenses pointed at the flight attendants.
Exactly.
If you act too quickly and enforce the rule with zero tolerance, you get filmed. That video gets fed into an algorithm, it goes viral, and by the next morning, you are the corporate villain on national television for traumatizing a family.
It's a nightmare.
The optic of, like, airline drags crying toddler off plane is something they want to avoid at all costs. But on the flip side, if you try to avoid that nightmare, if you lean too far toward patience, giving the parents an extra 15 minutes to soothe the child and show compassion, that exact 15 minutes pushes you past the midnight curfew.
Yep.
It triggers the logistical cascade failure, and you end up canceling a flight for hundreds of innocent people anyway.
It is a profound lose-lose scenario for the flight crew. We have built a system that expects flight attendants to simultaneously act as uncompromising enforcers of federal physics laws, empathetic child psychologists, and flawless public relations managers. And all of that while a literal countdown clock is ticking toward a massive logistical shutdown.
Which brings us to the core takeaways from sifting through all these sources, from the stark physics of a rejected takeoff to the neurological reality of a panicked toddler, right to the viral mechanics of a PR disaster.
Right. And the main distillation of all this information is that the balance between our desire for compassion and our demand for absolute safety is incredibly, undeniably fragile.
Yeah.
Yes, the sources universally agree that preparation is essential. Parents can bring familiar toys, download shows, read books about airplanes, and try to explain the sensory experience of takeoff to mitigate the fear before it even starts.
But at the end of the day, all the preparation in the world can still fail, and there's a hard physical line that cannot be crossed.
There is. Airlines simply cannot compromise on safety regulations that are mathematically designed to protect the lives of hundreds of people. The physics of kinetic energy do not bend for human empathy.
They really don't.
Even when the cause of the disruption is something as deeply sympathetic and understandable as a small, scared child sliding under a seat to hide from a loud noise, safety has to remain the absolute priority over schedule and over comfort.
The next time you settle into your seat on a flight and you hear that familiar, reassuring click of the seatbelt sign turning on, I want you to think about this story. Think about the massive infrastructure keeping you safe, and think about that invisible line being drawn in the cabin, the fragile boundary between our human capacity for empathy and the absolute rigid necessity of physics. It really changes how you view that simple metal buckle sitting across your lap.
This raises an important question, actually something really worth pondering long after you finish this discussion. If a global airline's ultimate uncompromising responsibility is safety and efficiency, but a young child's ultimate reality is sometimes uncontrollable, instinctual fear, are we designing our modern travel systems, our schedules, and our rules for ideal, perfectly rational humans rather than the messy, emotional, real ones we actually are?
That is the perfect thought to leave you with today. We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the chaotic intersection of air travel, systemic safety, and human nature. Keep questioning the systems around you, stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. Was Porter Airlines right to cancel the entire flight after a child refused to wear a seatbelt? Or should the airline have handled the situation differently without disrupting the journey of all other passengers? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.